From the Sky News Centre, this is Paul Murray Live.
Thank you so much to the Queen of Coachella. We love Shari and look forward to seeing her again same time tomorrow night. Let's get straight into it. Lots to get to. Something for everyone. Some great debate, and we're looking forward to all of that in a moment or two's time. But for how long have I named the Prime Minister and the Labor leader for many years before that each way Albo? Because so often he'll say one thing one day, mean another day, and there's no greater example than each way Albo was the person who had certain standards in opposition that had been flushed down the toot as soon as he became the Prime Minister. Let's go back to 2021 for the first example of the each way tonight. Do you reckon Scott Morrison has been to a petrol station recently? Petrol prices are surging on his watch. That was back when unleaded was $1.79. $1.79 if you have the E10 stuff as well. $1.96 the sky was falling in when that was normal unleaded. Well, now petrol prices around the country way above $2, $2.30 in some parts of the country. But the Prime Minister, who of course was so outraged back then, does nothing about petrol taxes today, despite the fact that he has the gall to campaign in Queensland as part of their upcoming, Tasmania as part of their state election, talking about action on cost of living. The action, of course, when it comes to fuel prices is not cutting them. The action from this government has been to increase petrol prices. It was 23 cents when he came to power, but each way Albo has now pushed it up to 49 cents in the dollar. Now, of course, the Prime Minister does this because petrol prices literally don't matter to him. As a person who's been a politician for an awfully long time, a staffer before that, but certainly as the Prime Minister, he's in the bubble inside the bubble inside the bubble inside the bubble. It is the bubble of one. In this case, the car is called C1. That is the Prime Ministerial limousine, where, of course, and understandably, the Prime Minister is not pulling over to the side of the road because it's a little cheaper at this station than that station. He ain't filling up petrol. Something that, of course, he was more than willing to have a go at when he wasn't the Prime Minister. So either he was disingenuous back then or he doesn't care now. Either way, not great looks. But other people in a position to cut petrol taxes rather than increase them, of course, grim Jim Chalmers, the Treasurer, who's always popping up somewhere, flying here, there and everywhere. And yeah, I know, it's part of the job. But do you think he cares that you're paying 49 cents in the dollar, 49 cents in the litre, I should say, for petrol taxes? No, because we had a look at his expenses forms today. Now, we have no information for 2023. The system is so ridiculous that they haven't updated that. But here's the latest. For the last 6 months of 2022, the bloke who apparently was doing something about cost of living, well, he didn't have to worry too much about it for himself because you were paying for it. His scheduled commercial transport, which of course means flying around, domestically in Australia, almost $36,000. The amount of money he was allowed to spend on living away from home, be it for Parliament, speeches or anything else, $23,000. And this, by the way, is for 6 months. 6 months, not 12, 6 months. We paid $7,148 for his personal plated car. The extreme amount of that is the fuel card that you and I pay for. So even when an MP or a minister or a treasurer is putting petrol in their own car, they're not paying a cent. We are. And this bloke is so tidy with the public purse that he even claimed $1,000 in parking. So are you surprised the guy who does not pay for petrol does not notice when the prices go up because it's just how much and tell us the kilometres? That's it. The company car is paid for by us. The flights where he goes around the country telling us that he really cares about cost of living, despite the fact that, of course, he took $1,500 off 10 million workers, despite the fact that his tax cuts were $14 for people in Dunkley, $15 for people on $45,000 or $120 a month if you happen to be earning over $100 and something thousand, please. And is there another reason why? So if the Prime Minister isn't noticing, he's not going to cut the taxes, and the bloke who counts the taxes isn't going to notice the taxes because we're paying for everything to do with his car. What about the Assistant Treasurer? What about Stephen Jones? Now, you've heard a bit about him today because, of course, he lives in the southern part of, well, not the southern part of New South Wales, but sort of in and around that Illawarra area, Wollongong, all that kind of area. And he decides to claim car trips between there where he gets chauffeur-driven down to Canberra. Because obviously for him, do you turn left and go to Canberra, do you turn right and go to the airport? Either way, you pay $43,000. And again, these details are not from this year. They go back into 2022. For anyone who's been living under a rock, Mr Jones charges taxpayers for a private plated vehicle, including his fuel allowance. However, on at least 3 occasions, he used government-issued cars for the 2.5-hour journey between Shell Harbour and Parliament House. Now, remember, we already pay for him to drive the car that is given to him as an MP, but then we pay on top of that car for the one that he wants to sit in the back of. And it's not because the mobile phone magically works. Anyone who's driven between Sydney and Canberra knows there's about an hour of it, regardless of whether you're on Telstra, Vodafone or anything else. It doesn't work for about an hour. So I'm not entirely sure what the reason was. If he wants to come out and say he was sleeping, maybe that could be it. Sorry, you saw me with the glasses. 3 trips were part of $43,000 Comcar bills that he racked up between April and December 2022, which of course were Labor's first 7 months in government. In the same year, he also claimed more than $11,000 in the personal vehicle. So are you surprised that the Prime Minister, who's driven around for free, the Treasurer, who even claims the parking tickets on the car that we already pay for, hasn't done anything about petrol tax? Well, are you surprised that the bloke who was advising the bloke, who works for the bloke, who is not paying for his petrol, is not doing anything to cut petrol taxes? Here he is, Stephen Jones, explaining why that's a good idea.
As much as we'd like to, we can't. It's about a $6 billion hit to the budget. And the budget is already well in debt. We've got $1 trillion worth of debt that we've got to service, and the cost of that is now costing us more than we pay for medicines. It'll be costing about as much as we pay for Medicare sometime towards the end of next year. So the costs are significant. So a tax cut is basically a hit to the budget as well. And we just simply can't afford to be doing that at the moment.
That was before, of course, they posted a $20 billion surplus. So as we've told you how many times, about $3 billion, $6 billion, $8 billion to cut petrol taxes, they could afford it. They just wanted the biggest surplus possible so they could rub it in politically. At the same time as he was making those comments on radio, he was charging taxpayers for the limo ride between his electorate and Canberra. Now, many people in politics have been around for a long time, including Stephen Jones. And you see, Stephen Jones has got form on fighting for those of us that would like to cut petrol taxes. In fact, I can go right back into the Wayback Machine of the internet and find this one from 2014 when petrol taxes went up via indexation under the Abbott government. Local families are already struggling to make ends meet with the cost of living because this government's unfair budget, the last thing they need is to pay more tax every time they fill up the car. Stephen Jones cracking at the Liberals for having a petrol tax rate that's lower than the one that he and his mates have chimed in at 49 cents per litre. This is a sneaky move by the Abbott government, trying to get through the back door what they couldn't get through the front door. Couldn't say better myself, Stephen. But of course, he was talking about then, not now. The each-way elbow disease is one that is often caught by governments, but is absolutely dead on point when it comes to this one. The Assistant Treasurer, the Prime Minister, all of these people that were willing to say, hey, have a look at petrol taxes, cut petrol taxes, cut petrol taxes, and then eventually, of course, they were cut. But then the chance they had to keep them lower, they stuck with it. Despite the fact they had $20 billion more than they needed in spending. 6 months later, any plan to change petrol taxes for the back half of 2023? None at all. What about the start of 2024? In fact, we'll put them up. And this is the minister who, again, if nothing else, adheres to the talking points, because this was his excuse as to why, under his watch, while he's putting the budget together with the Treasurer and the Prime Minister, about why you needed to lose that $1,500 in a guaranteed tax return from a couple of years ago, and when they ripped it out of people's bank accounts, and they did so in July of last year. This was what Stephen Jones said then.
It's important that we are ensuring through sound economic management that we don't make the inflation problem worse.
So each way elbow doesn't just apply to the boss. It applies to the deputy boss and the deputy boss and the deputy, everyone on that side of the aisle. Put simply, cut petrol tax. Cut petrol tax. Now, a little more on cost of living, because I've got a lot of information for you on this tonight, including some pretty sobering reading, which has come from the people that are dealing with people who are truly at their wits' end. Now, cost of living, regardless of what you talk about, it all costs more, despite the fact that they want to say, well, yeah, it costs more, but it doesn't cost as much as it did a year ago. Come on. It all costs more since this mob came to power. And we are learning today via a bunch of business and government people, including Jim Chalmers, who no doubt, of course, paid his own way to get to the Financial Review Business Summit today, that inflation and interest rates are set to go higher than go backwards. Remember, the best case scenario that the Reserve Bank put on the table is even if they start to cut things, they won't do it till 2025, 2026, and even then it'll be 75% of the extra amount that you've had to pay since this bloke and his treasurer and his assistant treasurer and all the other people backing them in came to power. And specifically on housing, there's a group of people who need to be recognised about the financial difficulties that they're in right now. It's not the majority of the population, but it's people who are in a financial bind at the moment, no matter how hard they work or what job they do. Because we learned today that pressures are growing particularly on people who are now starting to have real problems when it comes to actually paying for their mortgages at the moment. Now, interestingly, there was a group called Suicide Prevention Australia. They put out a report today about the number of people that have been reaching out to people like Lifeline and a whole bunch of other organisations to talk about how to handle the emotional stress of the current cost of living situation. The regular survey, which was released on Monday, showed that half of those that were surveyed were distressed through the March quarter, that meaning right up until today. A 4% increase on December. So things getting worse for people when it comes to paying things off, not better. That's 12 points worse than it was this time last year. So guess what? The Prime Minister might stand in a lectern saying action on cost of living. Reality is that it is getting worse and worse and worse. And meantime, the particular group of people who I was mentioning before that are feeling a specific squeeze are the ones who have been most targeted by this government. The ones who were told, you've got too much, you pay your fair share in tax, but you are not allowed your fair share in tax cuts. These are the people with personal or household incomes of over $150,000, as described as the big losers of the tax changes which took place a little bit earlier this year. Now, meantime, and interesting to note, yes, there was a collection of tariffs that have been removed from things like toothbrushes and tampons. They're called nuisance tariffs, but as even the crazy cat lady would say from Tasmania, please, this doesn't really touch the sides.
What are you going to save, 10 or 20 cents? Seriously, mate, that they better come up with better offers than this rubbish that they're coming up with to give people a cost of living out there just a little bit more room to move. This is just tipping around the edges of it, and it's not good enough.
Well, a broken clock is right twice a day as well. She's absolutely right on that. Also, Financial Review, new opinion poll about where everything stands politically, and things seem to be a little bit better for the Liberal Party than conventional political media would conclude. Now, while everyone's out and about campaigning and doing their bit when it comes this time, I think, to the Tasmanian elections, have a look at this. Liberal National Party primary vote, 39%. Now, that is about as low as you can get for being pretty competitive at a federal election. In fact, going to 2019, a 39% primary vote collection with preferences from the Palmer United and One Nation people was enough to get Scott Morrison re-elected. But you can see the Labor Party, which was at some point 33% primary, down now to 31. The Greens stable at 14. And the only thing that has gone up is the Liberal National vote, according to this. The Teals, the Independents, One Nation, Palmer, everything else has apparently gone down. But because you take 31, you add 14, and you add an awful lot of Teal preferences to it, two-party preferred vote right now, 51-49. Now, does that show the Labor Party winning? Yes. Is the most likely outcome of the next federal election a debate between majority or minority government for Labor? Yes. But at 2PP 51-49, the preferences of those minor parties, particularly what will happen with UAP, what will happen with One Nation, if the preference discipline exists like it did in 2019, this is going to be close. If it's the way it was in 2022, where it sprays everywhere, Labor probably gets back closer to a majority than the minority that at this stage they start to look at. And as we know, the entire political focus of the government is trying to pull off a Joe Biden. Basically say, keep us in power because the other guy is so terrible, so awful, such a danger to democracy that even if life has been materially worse since we became the government, and even when we have $20 billion extra in money, we will not cut things like petrol taxes that are the difference between how people move around and not in our communities, or as I told you last night, the difference between whether somebody leaves the house at all or not. But of course, it's all about Get Dutton, the dirt unit, which has been set up by the Prime Minister's office. It was done so after The Voice because the punishment that Dutton must get for denying the Prime Minister his place in history, for his Wikipedia entry, having a no, not a yes next to it, it's all roads lead to how evil Peter Dutton is. And try as they might and try as hard as they do, like Peter Harcher over there in the Sydney Morning Herald, where Morrison mightn't hold a hose, but Dutton doesn't hold a policy. And as much as nasty Nikki Sava will drip away in the age that Dutton and Lee have created a foolproof what not to do election guide, again, this poll might be a one-off, but it's interesting. Guess who has higher negatives? The Prime Minister. The each way elbow, 45% of people have an unfavourable view of him, 43% have an unfavourable view of Dutton. Yes, Dutton, Albanese leads on favourables, 37 to 30, but there's an awful lot of people who are neutral or unsure, which means they can be won over in an election. The Prime Minister's idea is to turn that 27 number, the grey number next to Peter Dutton, push it as negative as possible, but the reality is right now, tonight, this poll, guess who has a more unfavourable rating? The bloke running the dirt unit as opposed to the person who is the subject of the dirt unit. Now, I've been keeping an eagle eye on this report, which the government has been sitting on for months. It is one which is going to lead to people paying more for aged care based off the perception of whether or not you are rich heading into retirement and then aged care. And the aged care minister, of course, sat on a panel that put this report together and started leaking about the contents of this report back in December. You see, in December, they said that they were going to move towards a user pays option on aged care. The assumption was they would announce this policy in January, but of course, they decided to shelve it. Why? Well, because despite the fact that the appetite for user pays in aged care was where the government was starting to go, they held the report back, was not released in January, was not released in February. But now, as we move our way to the middle of March, the report, which was apparently ready to go in January but was held off for political reasons, looks like it might be about to drop, with the cost of aged care living set to rise for wealthier Australians. Wealthy Australians, of course, are people who have a home that's worth more than $300,000. Wealthy Australians. So again, the signal balloons have gone up. The report that they were too embarrassed to show us in February, too embarrassed to show us in January, started softening us up for in December, hid from the voters in Dunkley. Well, it looks like it is about to drop much sooner rather than later. First, the reporting was there, of course, with Philip Curry. It's been doubled down on by Andrew Clennell on this network in the past couple of days.
The opposition has warned of a death tax or about the dangers of using the family home to determine how much people should pay for aged care. So I don't think the government will go down that path. But will they seek to lift the cap on the refundable deposits people pay now, or lift user pay fees for the sector, as many argue needs to occur?
Now, he's plugged in. So what are they going to do? They were going to tell us in January. They didn't tell you in February. They hid it until after a by-election in March. Watch this space. Rich, if you've got $300,000 in the value of your home, please. Now, I want to take a second to talk about something that I do often speak about on the show because it is literally the future of the country. And the reality is the kids are not all right. Whether we agree it's because they're brought up too softly or everyone wins a prize, the reality is that the kids are not all right. Now, so often when we talk about youth issues, it's things like youth crime, which are going to be determinant factors, particularly in the Queensland election in a few weeks' time. We on this show, I think more than many others, talk about the school system and particularly the fact that despite the fact that billions have gone in, worse education results come out. But let's all take a deep breath because it's time to talk about our kids and our grandkids, our nieces, our nephews. Because a report came out today from the people who I absolutely love their work, and that is the Kids Helpline. and it has shown that child suicide concerns are going up, way up, like football stadiums of people big. Now, the Kids Helpline is an incredible organisation. This is an organisation which, of course, relies so heavily upon donations, and you remember that we've raised plenty in the past for them. We went out and we saw their operation in and around COVID. I am forever thankful to you and anyone else who gave money to us to hand on to them. It literally helped save kids' lives. I know it's a big thing to say, but that's it. Now, today, the Kids Helpline Impact Report was released, and do not get overwhelmed, but this is how much information that they had for everyone to see about how many calls, how many times things were handed on to people, what were some of the things that were going on. It is really worth reading. Go and see it on their website, but I'll take you back to the highlights. The Kids Helpline counsellors undertook 3,893 crisis or safety interventions nationally. Now, this means that while the kid was on the phone, somebody was calling 000 for the ambulance, police, or other numbers for child protection services. 3,893 times. Now, this is one helpline, and that's how many kids were right on the brink. So much so that someone had to call 000 or someone had to try to get them out of those families. Of these, 44% were related to suicide attempts or instances where young people were being assessed at being a high risk of taking their own life. The number of crisis or safety interventions in relation to suicide attempts by children and young people have more than doubled in the past 5 years. 824 in 2019, 1,706 in 2023. Now, this is a big, complicated issue. And there are things that we as parents and grandparents have got right and we've got wrong, and all of us, of course, are not to blame for whatever is going on inside the little people that we love. And I'm sorry if you're somebody in their late teens who's being referred to as a little person, but you know what I mean. But there's one thing that I would love you to be able to do, and that's to write down this telephone number. If you can write down the Kids Helpline for me, 1800 551 800. 1800 551 800. I want you to, wherever the family notice board is, put that number on the notice board. Because there are things that our kids may not be willing to say to us that they will be willing to say to somebody else. Make sure this telephone number is in their phone. Make sure the website, kidshelpline.com.au, is in their bookmarks, that you've got this information on the fridge. And nobody wants to admit that their kid might be struggling, but their kid might be struggling. And not everyone has got the ability to go and take their kid off to counselling or something like that. But this is an opportunity for them to be able to do it from their room, do it from the backyard, do it on the way to the bus. The wonderful thing about the Kids Helpline as well is that they have got text message services, and there are thousands and thousands of kids. That's the way they get their help. But whatever ickiness you might feel about putting that telephone number up in your house, believe me, the joy you will feel if a kid seeks help will be 500 times better than whatever awkwardness you might feel about that number. If your kids or your grandkids say, hey, what's that number? You can say, oh, it's just a number. If you need help, if you need emotional help, that's a number to call. I'm always here. But if you don't want to talk to me, if you don't want to talk to mum, don't want to talk to dad, you can ring those guys anytime you want. And it doesn't matter if you're feeling a little bit down or there's big storm clouds inside you or there's a big rage or something really, really terrible is happening in your life, they'll always be there. And also when you do that, please go to their website and donate. You did it so beautifully during the pandemic. May we continue to do it now into these different times. We all love our kids. We all love other people's kids. We all love our families. Too many kids are struggling. Too many kids need intervention. And I don't care why they need it. If they need help, you don't ask somebody why they need help. You just give them the help, okay? 1800 551 800. 1800 551 800. All right, quick break. Back with more. Plenty to talk about here. Matt Canavan getting ready to go toe-to-toe with none other than Nicholas Reese. We're just getting started. Thanks for watching here on Paul Murray Live this Firecracker Monday night. Thank you so much for watching. Been looking forward to this tonight. And Nicholas Rees has been particularly excited as the Deputy Lord Mayor of Melbourne because he's in air conditioning right now. Still 30 degrees in Melbourne right now and still 13 minutes before the sun goes down in Perth, where the great Matt Canavan joins us right now, and he's loving the idea of being able to jump out and have dinner after the show rather than walk out to the empty streets of Yeppoon when he's done with us at about 10 o'clock Queensland time. Lads, lovely to see you. Now, Nicholas, some whinging about Moomba being cancelled today. Now, does this still mean that the King, Queen and non-binary monarchs get to reign for another year? What happens?
Well, Moomba wasn't cancelled. The parade was cancelled this year because it was just so damn hot. You could fry an egg on Burke Street there today. It was absolutely flaming hot. And, of course, we've got over 1,900 volunteers participating in the parade. And there was a serious OH&S issue around having them, put all their gear on and go through it. So for the benefit of everyone, we decided not to proceed with the parade. But the actual broader festival itself went ahead. I was just coming into the studio tonight. There was fireworks going off along the Yarra. Thousands of people out there on the rides, having a good time along the river. It's still been a fantastic year for Moomba, notwithstanding the very sad fact that the parade didn't go ahead.
All right. Notice you didn't correct me, Matt, on the non-binary monarch. Maybe that is the plan for the future, but we'll get to that. Now, Matt, let's talk about the ute tax, Bowen's big car ban. Now, don't you love that, of course, the smother when they were increasing petrol taxes to 49 cents per litre was to pretend that if you buy a certain car at the right time by 2028, you'll save $1,000. Over the weekend, that number just got pushed up to $1,800. But now there is supposedly some potential light at the end of the tunnel for negotiation here. Which do you believe, the made-up numbers or the even more made-up idea that they're going to back down here?
Well, I mean, if the government wants to reduce these emission limits by 60%, they're saying they're going to save us $1,800. Well, why not reduce them by 80% and save us even more? I mean, it doesn't make any sense, Paul. I mean, putting these extra ridiculously aggressive reductions of carbon emissions on cars next few years is clearly going to make some cars more expensive. It might even make some cars not available because the government seems to be under the misperception that it's the suppliers, the manufacturers who deliver the cars to Australians. Actually, it's the customers. And this is a fundamental problem, I think, that the current Labor government seems to have, is that our markets, our businesses, should actually be run for the customers. And so what we should be trying to do is design a car market and have cars available for people to buy, which they actually want. And if people want to buy a Tesla, good luck to them. And then more businesses will come in and they'll sell Teslas. If people want to buy Ford Rangers and Toyota Hiluxes, why should we stop people being able to buy that? And that's what ultimately this government plan is, to stop you being able to buy or afford a car of that nature, because those cars will be massively over the carbon emission limits that the government sets or is planning to set. Now, it's pretty clear that the polling on this must be absolutely terrible, because already Chris Bowen is laying the ground here to back down. We'll see where that back down goes, but geez, I hope we could buy our own things again, Paul, and not have to have a moral and political argument just about what car we want to drive. Yeah,
well, again, Nick, as Tim Blair was able to point out and point us to some documentation, that in the United States, many of the cars we're talking about are actually excluded from the scheme, as opposed to that's the way it is in the US, therefore it must be the way it works here. Before we get into retort or response to what Matt just said, do you agree that this thing is starting to bite, that something inside the government is noticing that the criticism of the policy is landing?
Well, look, certainly Peter Dutton tried to dial up the scare around the so-called ute tax in the lead up to the Dunkley by-election, and it certainly didn't seem to bite there. Having said that, the Labor government has been badly burned by carbon tax claims in the past, and so I do think they should be cautious around this and keep a very close eye on the politics as well as the policy. As for Matt Canavan, I mean, look, we all know he's the number one cheerleader for coal and fossil fuels. So he wants to stop human progress. He doesn't want us to move forward. He doesn't want Australia to catch up with the rest of the world, which is what this policy is doing, and he knows it. I mean, we look to the mighty US auto market. That's the model that the government is looking for here. So
it has exemptions
this is
for all
not
the ones they're
crazy
not going
stuff.
to exempt.
It's quite modest. It's about letting Australia catch up with the rest of the world, and of course, it'll deliver lots of benefits for Aussie motorists, including obviously cars that save you money over the whole life of the vehicle because the renewable power that goes into the electric vehicle is cheaper. But secondly, we'll get a better range of vehicles coming here, because the point Matt didn't let you know about is that Australia is currently missing out on many of the new models of EVs, which are going elsewhere, but they're not coming to Australia because we've still got these antiquated fuel efficiency standards in place. So it's just about moving forward. It's nothing to be scared about. It's called the future. It's time to embrace it.
How many more subsidies can these EVs get? We've already got a fringe benefit tax change now, which massively provides subsidies.
Luxury car tax on hybrids.
You don't pay... Your luxury car tax is reduced. That's right, Paul. You don't pay fuel excise, of course, if you drive an electric car, so you're being subsidised by those who do drive an internal combustion engine. And now we're going to have this ridiculous mechanism where we learn over the weekend that Tesla is banking on getting $200 million a year from the government's ute tax, because the tax actually doesn't get paid to the government. It'll get paid to the EV sellers and manufacturers like Tesla. And so if they're going to get $200 million a year, that means you, if you're not using a Tesla, you're evil and terrible, you will be paying Tesla $200 million a year to a foreign company. Well, why do we need to do this merry-go cash around? Just let people buy the cars they want. And if you want to buy a Tesla, good luck to you. I've got nothing wrong with it. They're great cars to drive. But let Australians be free again.
Now, boys, we could keep on this, but I want to get to something that is even more important than the cars that we drive, and that is the people who we drive around in them, and that being our kids. Now, again, I get back to where I was just a few minutes ago. There's a lot of reasons why our kids are screwed up, and parents and, got to say, forgive me occasionally, grandparents, we all play our part in all of this. Wider society, social media, role of genders, all of these things are absolutely the case. A sook generation that's told that they don't have to go to work and everyone wins a prize. Yep, true. But they're struggling, and that means the people who are helping them need our help, which is why I keep talking about the importance of something like the Kids Helpline. There might be something that they will raise with a stranger that they won't raise with you as the loved one in their life. That's why you've got to have that number around. But, Nick, let's talk about this here, because, again, these are not sexy topics. They're not ones that are going to get people excited because Team Red's fighting Team Blue. But we have to acknowledge there's a massive problem, and the kids are not all right.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more on this one, Paul. Look, as you know, I'm bringing up 3 kids who are in primary school and high school, and so I'm seeing it firsthand. I am very, very worried about the impact that the devices are having on children. There's a study just out this week showing that young children don't have the vocabulary that children their age did years ago, because they spend so many hours just passively consuming what's there on that screen. And then, I've seen it again firsthand. In the old days, if your kid didn't get invited to the party, you go, oh, well, darling, there'll be another party next week. But of course, nowadays the kids can sit there and watch their other friends beaming images, photographs, sharing stuff from the party. And so kids, those old tensions that could happen as kids growing up are amplified by social media and online technologies. And that Kids Helpline data you took us through before, where they're getting 1 call a day from sextortion type cases, is just horrific.
Yeah, and that's the other thing.
So it's a very serious situation.
No, it is absolutely. Matt, again, we've talked a lot about the role for boys, and I don't know what the gender breakdowns are and even specific age breakdowns yet in the report. I'll go cover to cover on it tonight. But I mean, how do we help? I mean, it's good these lines are there. I want people to reach out to them, even if people think it's unconventional, that somebody will be more open to a stranger than they are to us as a family member. But how the hell do we help? Because they need it. They seriously need it.
Well, I think at a personal level, the stuff you're doing, Paul, is commendable. And the more we can help those on the front line here responding to these issues, the better. So if you can do that in your community, if you can volunteer doing these things, that's great.
Good man.
Look, in my role as a parliamentarian and public policy, I agree with what Nick said about the concerns about devices. Social media, I think, is something we need to seriously consider restricting to children of a certain age. It's too young for some, I think, at the moment. And I'd also add, I just think our young people are becoming too medicated. We're relying too much on a pharmaceutical response. Far too many of our children are on SSRIs. I don't think this stuff is proven to help, and I think a lot of these companies are making a lot of money out of the distress that children have without actually improving their lives at all.
No, I'm with you completely. Again, can we go full screen on this? Just write the number down, put it somewhere in the house, make sure that you have a look at the website, check it out for yourself before you maybe want to hand it on to the little people in your life, however little is these days. kidshelpline.com.au, 1800 551 1800. So we learned today that apparently the federal government's going to be moving a couple of mountains to make it easier for big projects to go ahead. Now, Matt, I would love to believe that that is actually the case when it comes to things like mining, but the reality is that this government, if it's doing this with one hand, it's about to introduce the new version of the EPA, an Environmental Protection Agency, a whole bunch of other massive changes that while you'll get an approval here, you'll get knocked back there. Plus, don't forget, you've got, of course, the pressure coming from young people to say that climate change duty of care should be written into legislations that mean there'll be no more mining.
Oh, absolutely right, Paul. Today's announcement, or not really announcement, just distraction from the Treasurer, had no details at all. Just said, we're going to try and help and make things go quicker. I mean, that's all very welcome, but under this government, the approvals for gas are blown out to over 500 days for a gas project. As you say, they're in secret developing this new EPA. There are reports out today that the mining industry have been locked in secret negotiations with the government about what this will look like. Why are these being done in secret? Why didn't the Treasurer give the details to the business community about that today? Because, as you say, these changes could have massive ramifications for the way projects are assessed here. They potentially reduce ministerial power and provide more power to bureaucrats, some of whom, of course, don't want projects to happen. And as you've highlighted there, they're going to add, apparently, they're talking about adding this new climate test, which could mean that all projects potentially have a climate impact. And we're not just talking about mining projects. Airports have been stopped in the UK because of this reason in their laws. Roads would potentially be at risk. And farming as well, because we know all the greenies hate the production of red meat and the development of agricultural land. So that's going to be a real risk for us going forward. And as I say, the government should be public about these details. And you can't believe that they're going to cut approval times when they're also developing more and more green tape behind the scenes.
Now, Nicholas, one of the very final announcements of the Labor Party in opposition, literally my memory was it was the day before the election, and in part it was trying to save Terry Butler from the Greens, who was the environmental spokesperson but ended up losing to the Greens, was for this new regulatory bodies to be increased with focuses on things like everything from land clearing to mining. That's currently being negotiated behind the scenes, the draft stuff. I don't want to bore people with too much on the air, but Matt's I think, on the right track about what might be coming down the pipe. Obviously, they'd be able to get them through the Parliament with the help of the Greens and doormat Dave Pocock, no question there. But how can two things be true? The government's going to be trying to increase environmental regulation while opening up the possibilities of more fossil fuel projects.
Well, I think they're looking to improve the environmental regulations, not increase them. And if they can improve them, you can have your cake and eat it too. You can get projects assessed more quickly, and you can get a go or no-go more quickly and with more certainty. And at the same time, you can have better standards in place, fit for purpose for the modern environmental challenges that we're facing. Like, it seems to me the bleeding obvious that climate change should be something that's taken into account when making an environmental assessment, because it's probably the most significant environmental challenge that we face. Now, none of these things need to stand in the way of progress. In fact, you'll probably find they'll help aid progress, Matt. I think we should wait to see the detail on this. You can't change the temperature of the globe project by project.
It's ridiculous. You can't have every project having to do a climate change assessment, because each individual project is nothing, obviously. No, it's just a matter of holding things up. The Greens have this bill in the Senate right now. It's just an attempt to hold things up. You know how this works. There'll be more court actions, more litigation from the Environmental Defender's Office, which the government is funding, by the way, holding up these projects. Forgot to mention that. I mean, this is absolutely absurd. Any attempt, any change to our environmental laws, which relies on getting the Greens' support in the Senate, will mean longer delays and less investment in our country, for sure.
Well, Matt, that's not my mail. My mail is going to be a deal done between Labor and the coalition on this. And that's why, Labor's trying to tighten up the petrol resource rent tax.
There'll be one bloke crossing the floor on that.
$2.5 billion per year. And in return, there'll be some tweaks to the EPBC arrangements. And so, I mean, it's not perfect, but you know how legislation gets done in the Parliament. And so my mail is that's where the deal's to be done. Matt, maybe you're out of the loop on that one.
Different things, but yep. We're talking about two different things. There is the petrol resource rent tax, which, yes, may be subject to an agreement with the government and ourselves, but there's also the government's promise to establish an Environmental Protection Agency, which I agree with Paul, was released on the eve of the election so it would avoid scrutiny and help get Labor Greens preferences on the day.
Yep, exactly. See, we remember every grain of sand on the beach. Time's exhausting, but we remember where they all are, all right, no matter how much they like to sweep them away. Thank you, guys. Stick around. We've got more with you, including I'm going to do something a little bit dangerous. And while I would not vote for Joe Biden, I'm going to explain why you should not count him out at this election. I'll explain why in a sec. All right, are you sitting down? Now, you know where I stand on Trump. I'm all in, and I'd have no problems if he was the next president of the United States. Right? I certainly wouldn't be voting for Joe Biden, especially when, of course, he's the man who has been decaying before our very eyes. Every now and then they fill him up with something and he can deliver speeches like he did the other day, but often it's like this.
And I don't want to, well, maybe choose my words. Anyway, I mean, Putin's kleptocracy.
Which is why the opinion polls are the way they are now. Now, many of the opinion polls that we've shown you to this point don't really break down what's going to happen state by state. Instead, this is a look via Real Clear Politics at some of the most recent ones, which basically, majority of which show Trump winning by a couple of points. But of course, it's not a national election. It's 50 separate state elections. And even then, there's really only 10 states that kind of matter. And even then, there's only 6 states that really have flipped over the Obama, Trump and Biden eras. But there was one thing that was rattling around in my head, which I often hear as the reason why Trump absolutely guaranteed slam dunk going to win. It's this quote from the 1980 presidential election and the debate between Reagan and Carter. Now, rather than just searching for the grab on YouTube, I actually watched the whole debate. And this line came after an hour of a version of the same thing that Reagan was saying.
We'll stand there in the polling place and make a decision. I think when you make that decision, it might be well if you would ask yourself, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? Is it easier for you to go and buy things in the stores than it was 4 years ago? Is there more or less unemployment in the country than there was 4 years ago? Is America as respected throughout the world as it was?
So cut, paste, do it again, Trump wins 50 states. Maybe not. You see, elections, what we'd like to say, are all about are you better off than you are 4 years ago. What they are often about is the choice that is put in front of you by the major parties, reinforced by the media, which is why you can't write Biden off. Remember, in the Pennsylvania Senate, a bloke who had had a stroke beat a TV doctor. Essentially, the tribalism in the US is now red team, blue team, that whichever meat puppet wins is up to what you believe. But while the question, are you better off than you were 4 years ago, would seemingly be answered pretty easily, no, vote Trump. What about these questions? Because this is what the next few months are going to be about. Did things get worse under Biden, or did Biden make things better? Do we need to fix the damage that Biden has done, or will Trump push the US over the edge? Is life better under Biden? Was or will life be better under Trump? Join me to make America great again, or join me to stop Trump. You see, one thing that is particularly unique to American politics is despite the fact that the stakes are so high, there's no detail that's ever offered. In an Australian election, you've kind of got to offer up a series of documents and an economic plan and this one thing, and 2 weeks later this will happen. But really, American elections come down to all of these other things. And who can get their question on the ballot is the one who ends up winning. Biden, of course, has all of the media, all of the establishment, and whether that is going to change that question from 4 years ago, we'll all wait and see together. So, Nick and Matt, let's talk about this just ever for a second. It is a truism that may be very obvious to people who are participants in elections, but to the good people watching it at home who love the data and want to know how the sausage is made, that is kind of how American politics works, isn't it, Matt? Where it's not about the question you feel 8 months out, it's the question you feel on the day you walk into the ballot box.
Well, I don't think that's too different from our elections, but you are right that typically in our elections, each party will have a bit of a laundry list of policies that they're going to implement if you elect them, and there's costings and they all add up. Whereas I suppose to steal a line, the US elections tend to be more about the vibe of each candidate. And there's a good reason for that the US is electing a president who themselves can't just go in and do whatever they want. They've got to go through Congress. They're quite limited in their power, unlike an executive government in our Westminster system. So you are electing someone a little bit more to manage a process rather than implement a precise plan. And look, I think your analysis is right. This is very, very close. It seems to me that quite unusually for an incumbent government, the election will probably all still be about Trump. He is just a magnet for news and controversy and polarising opinions. It's very, very close. It'll be a very interesting election, but also clearly the state of the economy, inflation is a big, big anchor around the current administration as well. It's going to hurt them a lot.
So, Nick, forgive me, while you were formatting an answer to what you thought the question was going to be, I'm going to ask you a completely different one. As a bloke who has been around state, federal elections, how do you get the question to be the one you want them to be asking?
Well, you've just got to hope that your proposition is more powerful, more impactful than the one that your opponent is putting forward. So Make America Great Again is one of the greatest political slogans of modern politics. It captured exactly how America was feeling at the time that Trump rolled it out in that campaign. Whether it is still the slogan for 2024, we will see. I am honestly not sure who's going to win this election. It's going to be one for the ages, I suspect. But I do think it would be way too early to be writing off Joe Biden. I mean, let's not forget, he's actually beaten Donald Trump before, and he does have some problems in some of those swing states, particularly where there are large Arab American voters who have sort of been turned off by what the US has been doing around Israel and Gaza. And he's also got some challenges with black American male voters and even with some of the Latino community as well. So I think things are going to be perhaps more challenging for him than they were 4 years ago. But nonetheless, he has beaten Trump before, and so I think it's way too early to be writing Biden off.
Again, I repeat, never forget, Democrats voted for a bloke who had a stroke and he won in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is one of the swing states. All right, I've only got about 20 seconds here, but you're on a long weekend right now, of course, in Melbourne, Nick. You wrote about this today. Very simply, the bumper sticker reason why you've got a day off in Victoria today?
Yes, it's Labor Day, which actually commemorates the 8-hour working day, which was started in Melbourne in 1856 when a couple of stonemasons down tools marched on Parliament House. It was the first place in the world where the 8-hour working day was secured. So I reckon it ranks up there with Vegemite and AFL footy as Australia's greatest gifts to humanity. And today we had a public holiday to remember it.
And I reckon about 4 people knew why they were having a public holiday. You were one of them and you wrote about it in the
It was a very good column.
Thank you, lads.
It was a very good column.
Correct. Do agree. Thank you very much, Matt. Thank you very much to you, Nick. All right, that's them done. We'll be back in a moment or two's time. Late debate 4 minutes from now here on Sky News. The royal photo that sent people crazy for the past couple of days. Guess who was admitted to editing the photo? Catherine herself. The Prince and Princess of Wales. Like many amateur photographers, I do occasionally experiment with editing. I wanted to express my apologies for any confusion the family photograph we shared yesterday caused. I hope everyone's celebrating, having a happy Mother's Day. Signed C for Catherine. So the culprit is the future Queen. Full coverage in the late debate.